Hello, class. First things first, let's go ahead and set up your notebook. You are going to have table of contents written out so that Heredity Notes are on page 90 and free choice output is on page 91. If your numbers are different from mine, please adjust accordingly. All right, so today we're actually going to talk about heredity. So in the past few weeks, we've been talking about DNA and how DNA has this wonderful code of base pairs that codes for our traits. And it can code for, it literally codes for every component of our appearance and how our body works and functions. We get one of our traits for each gene from our father and one from our mother, and that's just the general rule. And so I want to kind of go through some of the main vocabulary terms associated with heredity, and then we will next class talk about Punnett squares and how can we determine the traits that a person might have or an organism might have based on the traits that their parents have. First things first, though, let's start by defining heredity. So we're going to just kind of write the definition here. So basically, heredity is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. And yes, if you didn't know what offspring meant, you can probably infer that offspring meant children. Okay. So this is widely studied and we know a lot about it, but the very first person who sort of came up with the basic principles for heredity and genetics is a guy named Gregor Mendel. So he actually studied pea plants in order to come up with these basic principles, and some of them we won't get into until next week. But pea plants are pretty simple because they only have a finite amount of different traits that can be different about it. So it was easier to study that than to study, say, humans, which have an infinite possibility of combinations. Okay. First two words associated with heredity that are very important to understand are dominant and recessive. So dominant it's referring to the form of a trait that can mask the other trait. So refers to the form of a trait that masks the other trait. So for example, brown is associated with eye color often, and it is a dominant color. It's very dark, which oftentimes if a person has brown eyes, even if they received a trait of a lighter color, say blue or green from another parent, it's literally not going to show up because the brown would cover it up. So it literally masks the other trait. Recessive, on the other hand, is only going to show up if there is not a dominant present. So it refers to the form of a trait that can be hidden. So for example, in my eye color example, if a person has blue eyes, it means that they received only that trait, which means they would have had to receive it from both parents somehow. And it may have been hidden in a previous parent. It may have been the hidden trait, but they would have had to receive it from both parents. And that means that there's no dominant trait present there to mask the recessive trait. So let me explain what I mean by that. We represent traits using something called an allele. Allele is the letter that we assign a trait. It is usually based off of which trait is dominant. So in the eye color example, if brown is dominant, we would use the letter B. Now, because this is dominant, we're going to signify that by capitalizing the letter B. But let's say we use green eyes as the recessive. We don't switch to G. We use B. We just make it lowercase b. And blue eyes, lowercase b as well. And that's just coincidence that it also starts with a B. So these are called alleles, and there are so many of them for each trait, and there's tons of them when it comes to the human body. So it's hard to narrow it down to so few, and obviously there are more eye colors than this, but this is just basics. So we receive one allele from each parent. So one trait or one allele from each parent, and you have two parents. So let's say we receive, let's say we're dealing with brown eyes and blue eyes in our example. So the parents have brown eyes and blue eyes. So we receive, let's say the child has capital B, lowercase b. That means they received one brown allele and a blue allele. But because the brown is present, it is going to mask the blue. Therefore, this person would end up with brown eyes. Let's say the person ends up with two capital B, two brown eye alleles. Obviously, there's nothing to even mask. This person's just going to have brown eyes. And then let's say there's two lowercase b's. This is the only time where there isn't a dominant to cover up the recessive. Therefore, the recessive will show up and that child will have blue eyes. It is actually possible for a person to have blue eyes and neither parent have blue eyes. And that's because they might both have the recessive trait hiding, which means there's a 1 in 4 chance that they could end up, that child could end up with blue eyes instead of brown eyes. The last two vocabulary words that I want to talk about are homozygous and heterozygous. So when we say something is homozygous, we mean that they have two of the same exact alleles. So either two dominant or two recessive. So if we say homozygous dominant, we mean two capital. If we say homozygous recessive, we mean two lowercase. So this one is homozygous dominant. And this one is homozygous recessive. Again, homo meaning same. We've talked about that several times this year as a prefix. Okay, and then the other one, it has one of each allele. It has a capital and a lowercase. So we are going to call that heterozygous. Hetero meaning different. All right, thanks for taking notes with me today. If you have questions, reach out, let me know. Your homework is the free choice output on page 91. Please be sure to go back to your menu of options. Mnemonic is not one of those options for today. Please pick something else to do. Make sure it's thorough. Do not just guess that you remember what the requirements are. Actually go back and look and read it and check, because oftentimes people forget some of the smaller things. Again, reach out during office hours if you have questions or email me. Thanks. Bye.